In conversation with Bar-Giora Goldberg. Bar Goldberg is an American Israelite scholar and entrepreneur. He received his BSc and MSc from the Technion, Haifa, both in electrical engineering and communication theory. He co-founded two U.S. venture-founded technology companies in communications and imaging and published more than 25 U.S. patents. Goldberg was also a member of the engineering team that developed the pioneer Pillcam, a swallowable gastrointestinal capsule that transmits images of the digestive tract from the inside. Goldberg published a technical book with McGraw-Hill Company in 1995 titled Digital Techniques in Digital Synthesis. Consequently, he had a teaching career at tech seminars mostly in the US and Europe. Goldberg's lifelong interests were also in the area of history, music, and architecture. His recent focus has been the subject of this book, the rise of cognition and complexities, and the evolution of our perception of the world and the social order. Goldberg resides in San Diego, California. And in today's episode of Photo Interview, it's my utmost pleasure, join the segment to have on the show today, Bar Goldberg. Welcome on the show, Bar. It's nice to meet you, really.
Same here. It's a wonderful here in San Diego, which is really a paradise. But apparently, we have about 100 miles north of you, we have the horrible fires of LA. So
Wow.
it's a very tough situation now in California.
Yeah, because even when I see that you live in San Diego, California, I was like, oh goodness, that's a place with a fire. I hope you're safe. Thank you. Thank you for coming
You
on.
know, when the Spaniard discovered this place 500 years ago, they called it
Mm.
the land of fire.
And it's really a tragedy on those who the fire affected their houses. Their sad stories.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So, Bar, I need to first say that I am taken aback reading through the description page of your book, The Mind is Mightier, Reflections on the Historic Rise of Cognition and Complexity, whose description page on Amazon reads quite captivatingly to me. Yeah. And I would like to ask you, how does this book come about? What inspired you to write it?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. So, something about myself. I'm an American Israeli. I'm married with two. I live in San Diego, California,
Well,
and I have been very lucky. I was born with a natural skill for numbers. So for me, the world is all numbers. As much as I try to fight it, everything is numbers. When I drive, I see the numbers, and I immediately start to think about what they mean and how they divide and what they divide into, etc. But I'm lucky by the fact that I have a passion for the humanist studies, especially history and music. So music and especially opera is my life passion. So you can imagine that being a kind of a student all my life and a scholar, reading a
mm,
lot of information has been accumulated. And eventually, I think there was a pressure from the inside
mm,
to express myself
wow,
in a book, which, as I'm sure you know, is a huge adventure and a
absolutely.
lot of work. And you're not going to do it if there is no really need from inside to express yourself.
Yeah.
Now, the things that worry me, especially now here, is the issue of education.
Mm,
Um, my feeling is that I might have been the first generation that received better education than my children and my
wow.
grandchildren. And also, time management has changed, right? When I was young, what you could do with your free time was mostly play with friends or read.
Yeah.
Today, the kids have about 1,000 other alternatives. And when I hear that people are spending 4 or 5 hours a day on social media, I'm very, very worried. So uh, my thought was that I should produce a book about learning, about knowledge,
Yeah.
about what is important today. Because sure, playing is very, very nice and sport is wonderful. We all have to be involved. But eventually, the future is in the cognitive areas. I mean, you can see what's happening. I want to make a small comment, maybe outside of what you asked,
Yeah.
that I'm looking now at the book, it's now 4 years later, and I have one regret, and that is that chat was not available,
Oh,
chat AI, because today chat became available, chat, which is basically an editor, a writing editor, became available about 2 years ago. And I've been using it extensively. And chat is not only a wonderful editor, but also a wonderful organizer of your writing.
mm,
So it doesn't mean that you are going to take everything that is suggested, but I think that it is in certain ways superior to. I'm not saying that chat is replacing them because I suggest that you need to have an editor. You had to have somebody that's looking at what you've written and
yeah.
make comments about the organization and the structure, etc.
Yeah.
But chat is doing a fantastic job. And I think part of the evolution of technology that we have been accelerating in the last 50 years, which I think is fantastic.
Absolutely.
So my book is a kind of a history book that reviews the evolution of the cognitive part of our life, which is,
Mm,
history and art and politics and regimes and
yeah.
religion, of course. So quite wide in scope, and took about 6 years of writing and editing. But I have to say that I'm very pleased with what came up of it.
That's quite amazing. Sounds to me to be very great and quite amazing. Now, you also have another book in the name of Digital Frequency Synthesis Demystified. Could you tell us about what inspired you to write that as well?
Yeah, this is a very interesting story, actually. I'm sure you know, signal generation, the generation of signals, is a fundamental part of every piece of electronics. I mean, your electronic wristwatch has a clock in it, a crystal clock.
Yeah.
Your cell phone has many clocks in it.
Mm,
Every computer, every radio,
yeah.
every terminal, every satellite, every has many clocks that are basically clocking the data and sequencing the data.
Yeah.
And these signals were traditionally analog. That is, uh, they were using the universal phenomena of resonance. And if you take a resonance circuit, usually it will have its own frequency of resonating, and you excite it, it will generate this clock, this repeatable periodic signal.
Mm,
Uh, but about 30 in time, new technology, about 40 years. And it was a kind of a unique expertise. Later, through very complex mathematics, it became also part of phase lock loop, which is the main way of generating signals in complex systems.
mm,
I decided to write a book about it because people didn't know it.
yeah.
And actually, this book, which was a completely different experience than publishing today, I think you would be interested in publishing today.
Mm,
I wrote the manuscript. It took about a year. I was working, I had a family, I was busy. It took about a year to write. It's technical, it's a relatively very simple, straightforward to write. I contacted the three great technical publishing house, Prentice Hall,
yeah.
McGraw-Hill, another one. They immediately were interested. They gave me, and the book was published. And the book details a lot of the digital technology that is necessary to do this function. which now today, of course, became very, very well known and used. The interesting part for me was that when I published the book, in certain way, when you publish the book, when you stand on the ramp and speak to other people, you become an expert.
Yeah,
And I was
absolutely.
companies that were doing technical teaching,
Yeah,
mostly in Europe and in the United States. And I had a fantastic 7 years, fantastic career of converting usually a week's seminar to young engineers this knowledge, which it's a fantastic feeling because
yeah,
the older generation is passing the information to the new one.
absolutely.
And it gave me an opportunity to visit many people and to meet a lot of young people. And that was a fantastic thing. Unfortunately, after 9/11, it kind of fizzled, problems of flying and all that.
Yeah,
And these 7 years ended, but I'm very grateful.
wow. Thank
Actually,
you.
I have a copy. I'm sure I have a copy somewhere of the book, and I'm going to, yeah.
Beautiful.
After they sold about 3,000 copies, we're not interested anymore, and they actually
Wow.
gave it. I used another smaller publisher, um, and surprisingly, people continue to buy the books because then later other books came to the market that kind of competed
Yeah,
with it newer.
that's
But that was a fantastic adventure, and it was a fantastic career for me.
interesting. That's quite amazing to know, really. Thank you for sharing. Thank you.
Adventure, and that's the only way you have to take life, right? I mean, I've been lucky enough to have a wonderful childhood and a wonderful
Wow.
family. They basically, nobody has anything. I'm talking about
Oh,
in the
wow.
future. Nobody had anything, but we had a wonderful life. We had a caring family,
Yeah.
and then whatever you can do.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's quite amazing to know. And thank you so much for sharing. Now, I want us to go back to your book, The Mind is Mightier. For the sake of readers who haven't read it yet, and without giving much information away, could we have a sneak of what we had expect in terms of themes and subject lines picking up The Mind is Mightier?
Well, sure. I mean, I actually have no problem in giving up all the information. Only it's just impossible, of course, to give the information of a lifetime of studying in 5 minutes. But basically, I try to describe the various evolutions of our cognitive capacity in the various fields,
Mm,
which was basically history and thinking, kind of, philosophy,
yeah,
uh, and then politics and religion and the arts. And I want to start maybe by talking to saying what about, what is history? We mentioned that
mm,
before. It looks like a very quick, but actually it's very, very complicated but
wow,
the chronicle of the past is information that is coming from people telling us what they saw, what they did. And we are talking about thousands of years. Our
yeah,
civilization is actually very young. Our civilization, if our language was invented maybe 70, 80,000 years ago,
mm,
which started everything, um, our civilization is what, 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 years when people start to congregate
mm,
and to create societies that work together. Now we had hundreds and thousands and then millions of people working together.
yeah,
And as we know, the history of the past is full with mythologies, with people inventing things,
mm,
of false information for, maybe not for evil reasons, but that's how we have imagination.
yeah,
So, what exactly is history? Um, no, if you look at the Bible is kind of a history book, right? The
Yeah,
Bible starts
absolutely.
of the world, but nobody looked at the Bible as a history book because it's really a book of religion and a way of life. But you have this enormous amount of data of the past
Mm,
and theology, maybe his past, his biases. And so you will read different histories
yeah,
of the same history. And what exactly? We have better data, we have better technical tools to check things. So one of the issues that I've been dealing with was about history. Then I went through a different way of thinking and looking at the world, starting mostly with the Greeks, the ancient Greeks, so Plato and Aristotle, the people who told us that man is the measure of everything,
mm,
which I think we still believe in. Um, and so all the way to Darwin, of course, and then the critique on Darwin today, I'm sure that if we have time, you will ask me some of these questions.
yeah,
Some of us think that human evolution is no more Darwinian,
mm,
that it is all cognitive, it's all directed, and therefore it is accelerating. So we don't have to wait for the random process because we kind of know where we want to go
yeah,
with the ranking. And so, these are issues that people might disagree or so. And then, where the future is leading. And there are some very interesting thinkers like Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was
yeah.
talking about omega points, like, even though he was a Jesuit, and in his book really don't mention God, but the concept of the omega point was not totally new about eventually the human brain of the total humanity converging with the Christ. At the end of the day, was going to be this wonderful life of the spirit.
Wow.
Um, so, and then, even Fukuyama, that we all love, but unfortunately has been already conflicted. So that's that part of it. Then there is another chapter that talks about the various religions and the mythologies and the law, the system of the law that we are obeying. There is a chapter about the cognitive order, which has a great focus on language. Tell the truth, when I started to write the book, I did not expect that language will take so much space. But eventually, when you write about cognition, language is everything. Language is really what differentiates us from all the other animals, which is not biological, not carbon-based. That seems to, I assume I'm communicating with a person, not with a computer. Um, and then, of course, I after about about art and specifically architecture. My wife is an architect, so I'm very much into it, and music, which is really the great love of my life, with the great composers and the opera. So that's kind of the contents of the book in 5 minutes.
I love your take on this. It sounds very amazing and quite great to me. Thank you so much for sharing. And I wanted to ask you too, what kind of feedback has your book gotten so far in terms of reviews? And also, what
Well,
inspired you to write
well,
these books?
uh, not as much as I expected. It's not an easy read, I have to
Mm.
confess. Many comments. So some of them were, look, the fact is that nobody likes critique, but we have to have critique. I mean, otherwise it's not interesting. You have to hear the other side and where you can improve yourself. And so some of the comments were on the structure of certain pages or certain chapters. And some of the comments were on content. For example, as I mentioned, like the whole issue of is human evolution continue to be Darwinian or not? There are comments about, I admire Tilhard and the Omega Point and the vision of humanity actually becoming more and more spiritual, more and more brain and converging somewhere. I'm not Christian, so maybe my convergence is not Christ, but to an omega point where we can maybe come to an agreement and live harmonically in this wonderful world that we were given. Positive comments. There were a lot of agreement. There was a great appreciation for 6 years of hard work. I started to write late in life because when you're children, you're very, very busy. But then things go away and you have the time to do that. There's a lot of appreciation of making the effort. It is a very significant commitment. I'm sure that maybe you will ask me if we have time about it. This is a very serious commitment and a great effort, your time, and then publishing, and marketing the book. This is a great adventure that you want to venture into only if you're ready to make the effort.
Yeah. Oh, wow. I love your take on that, really. It's very amazing and quite pulling. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Apart from the books we've mentioned so far, do you have any other works you've authored or say currently working on?
Yes. So what happens is that, over a long technical career,
Yeah.
I made a bunch of publications.
Okay.
It's all technical. It's all, very mathematical. It's not something to report in such a meeting. But I'm working now on the next book, which is going to be a little bit lighter. It is kind of focused on our folly, on the mistakes that we made, that mostly was triggered by what happened with COVID and the horrible mistake that we made, especially here in the United States, that we had more than 1 million people dead, and many mistakes were made. The people tried the best they could, but many mistakes, and hopefully we're going to learn. And many books. It's not a book about COVID, but then when you start to think about human folly, you start to think about so much that we make wrong. So, there are chapters about the anarchists, and there are chapters about, which was a word that nobody wanted, but somehow happened. And if we could be now in a very similar situation where things are happening in Europe. Nobody expected there's going to be another horrible war in Europe. In the Middle East, there's always wars. But who knows what can happen when exactly there's no doubt that the great powers don't want wars. And history is a good teacher.
I love your take on that. It's quite amazing and quite great. Thank you so much for sharing. And yeah, before we wrap up for today, I'd like to ask you, is there anything else that you would love to share with the viewers about your books that we did not mention in this interview? I'd love the viewers to know. Is there anything? Also, what kind of advice do you have for struggling writers?
Well, first of all, I think that in order to write, you have to love writing. And I happen to love to write. I write every day. And as I mentioned before, with the aid of chat, things are actually much, much better because, English is not my mother tongue, obviously, even though I'm definitely writing better in English than in Hebrew. But there's a great joy in expressing yourself, in presenting your own worldview. It's something I think for my to be able, in years when I'm not going to be here, to look at the way I was thinking and how the world changed. By then, the world is going to be very different. So I think that you always have to be inspired. You have to have an internal drive to produce this work. But I think that it's very much worth it. I was in, you mentioned before, I was involved in this fantastic project. One of them was the swallowable pill, which was another company. It was not my company, it was another company that came with this brilliant idea. And there were so many um, challenges to make it work. It was
Yeah.
about 25 years ago. It's a very, very small pill with all technology inside it, with the cameras, with the lighting. Inside the body, it's dark. You want to take a picture, you have to light it. And all the technology that was necessary to transmit it outside and to be able to show the doctor what's happening inside. Before this pill, in order to see what's happening inside your small intestine, you had to open the person.
Mm.
Not anymore. And I remember when the FDA made approved the product, it showed in every newsletter in the world because
Yeah.
people could imagine, like the movies of the submarine inside the body. They could imagine how it works. Even technically, it was very, very, very complicated. And the product, to the best of my knowledge, is very successful until today.
Oh,
So yeah.
that's a great one you've got in there. Thanks for sharing. Thank you. And just in case we have some viewers who are currently watching this interview, I would love to get a copy of any of your books. On what platforms are they available on for purchase?
Um, well, I will tell you one thing. Publishing is not simple. And my advice, I don't have that much experience. My advice for people who aspire to publish, in the United States, every year now, 1.5 million new books are being published. Let's give you an idea
Mm.
how little we can read in a lifetime. A great reader reads 6,000 books in a lifetime. That's a great reader. Think about 1.5 million books publishing every day. Not to talk about the so many fantastic,
Wow.
class. I think that my experience, as I mentioned, was that 30 years ago, 35 years ago, when I published my first book, it was so easy. The publishers were so accommodating. Today, it's
Yeah.
totally different story. If you are not a established writer, nobody wants to talk with you. And so self-publishing is probably the best thing. My experience with my publisher was not good.
That's interesting, really.
There's no reason to pay for this. You can do most of it yourself. All the editing you have to do anyhow by yourself. So Amazon or whatever your choice is, they provide very good services.
Yeah, that's interesting. I love your take on that. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. And I left a link in the description part of this interview where interested viewers can get a copy of Bar-Giora Goldberg's book directly on Amazon and Barnes& and Nobles on his website and also on other platforms. I also left links to his social media pages for possible followings. So thank you so much, Bar, for accepting the invitation to be featured in P English Literature. I must say this is more than awesome, quite exciting, and very great having this conversation with you. Thank you so much for coming on.
A wonderful evening in your case.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure as well.